really wanted to thank Kristyn for that lovely introduction, and Mayor Patterson Howard. Irvington is also the home of Madam C.J. Walker, and the village plans to rename a street shortly to honor Madam C.J. Walker, an incredible entrepreneurial black woman who I've been in awe of ever since I moved to Irvington. And thank you for mentioning James Baldwin. Big fan of James Baldwin. So, I did want to just say I am really incredibly honored to be asked to be here with you, all of you honored guests here on the dais. David Osborne, thank you very much. All of you, and all of you on your lawn chairs, because this is such a, I'm going to say the tradition that you have here at St. Paul's, where we know we're going to hear the declaration read. It's such a great, it's a teachable moment, I think, for kids and for all of us, because we're really talking about the meaning, the contemplation of the founding of the United States, and I think that's important. Well, I find it really interesting that in New York State, we could be commemorating July 9th instead of July 4th. Maybe you all know this story, but that's the day that the New York Provisional Congress, that was the governing body at the time in White Plains, they voted to actually authorize and accept the Declaration. So, you know, to be clear, in Philadelphia, you all know that story, the 13 colonies were there. 12 of them had already approved the Declaration on the 4th, but New York was asked to abstain until they were given authorization. So they got that on July 9th. And so maybe in New York, I don't know, we could celebrate from the 4th to the 9th, maybe. What do you say? Certainly here in Mount Vernon. But also on July 9th, I don't know why I got obsessed with July 9th, but George Washington was in New York City then, and he was reading to his troops, with the British in Staten Island, by the way, reading the Declaration to his troops at 6 p.m. On the 9th. And after that, the crowd there went a little bit wild. Maybe you know this story, but King George III, there was a big statue, larger than life, King George on a horse, gilded. The crowd got a little wild and they tore down the statue. So apparently George Washington was a little perturbed about his own soldiers not being as disciplined as he might have liked. But it's a great story, I think, because right now you can go to the New York Historical Society and you can see the tail, the gilded tail. It's on the second floor. And there are other bits there, the cape and all that. But I also find this interesting. That was lead. That statue was made of lead. And the Patriots knew that was a very valuable commodity. So they took the pieces of it to Connecticut. And mostly women, and I channel your same concern about women's rights, hallelujah. But the women and children up there in Connecticut apparently made, at least from what I've read, 42,000 bullets out of the statue's lead that was brought up there. But another part of that story, Connecticut also had a lot of loyalists. So the loyalists buried some of the sections of King George, and they weren't made into bullets. And not so long ago, now I hope this isn't like disturbing to anybody, but the 21-inch arm and hand of the statue was found in Connecticut of King George not too long ago. So I thought that was an interesting story. And part of his head, the king's head, was buried in Washington Heights at Fort Washington. So now here's my dream. We're in Westchester. Who knew, right? Who knew? So I guess my dream would be that we'll find some fragments up here in Westchester one of these days, probably Mount Vernon, right? Absolutely. Right, okay, with this mayor, we're going to do it, right? Now, one more story about July 9th, if you're still with me. There's a printer in New York City, John Holt. He was in downtown New York City, and he was directed to print copies of the Declaration, you can imagine. Now, they called these broadsides. They're one-pagers, a newsprint type paper. And on July 11th, 500 copies of those particular copies, the Holt copies, ran off his presses. And at the top of these 500 copies, they're a New York story, again, a New York story. At the top of these copies, there was an excerpt from the minutes of that meeting that I told you about in White Plains, the local government. That section was specifically directed to the people of New York State, so they would know what had happened in White Plains. So here's where, kids can imagine maybe better than adults, but imagine those 500 copies being passed around, some here, why not here? This was the Eastchester Village Green, passed around and read. Many people could read, many couldn't, but in village taverns, in the hands of tailors and blacksmiths and families, including the enslaved and free persons of African ancestry living here and across the state. So, most of those people would now understand that their lives were going to go through major disruptions. Maybe about a third still oppose the Declaration. Some others may just have read Thomas Paine's Common Sense. Some of you are from New Rochelle. You probably know that there's a lot of interest in Thomas Paine in New Rochelle and all over. So those people would probably be very anxious to break with the mother country. And many really feared taking either side. So I'm just trying to get you to imagine what it might have been like here at that time, because we know now, they didn't know, unbeknownst to them, 7 years of war then happened. You declared independence, but that was a declaration. Then came 7 years of war. So besides the battles, Hell's Point, where's that way, right? Right, okay, get turned around. And White Plains, those were battles, but day by day here in Westchester County, there was essentially guerrilla warfare. The woods, the hills, the streams, the backyards of all the places around here. And the Bronx, by the way, was part of Westchester at the time. So I want to read quickly the words on the top of those copies of the Declaration. You know you're going to hear a very good reading of the Declaration. But at the top of those particular broadsides, these were the words that the New Yorkers were paying attention to. Resolved unanimously that the reasons assigned by the Continental Congress for declaring the United Colonies free and independent states, boy, underline states, are cogent and conclusive, and that while we lament the cruel necessity which has rendered that measure unavoidable, we approve the same, and will, at the risk of our lives and fortunes, join with the other colonies in supporting it, unquote. So the die was cast for New York. So quickly, I'm going to finish the 500 Holt broadsides. Bringing this up to 2021, some of those delicate documents have survived those 245 years since they were printed. And you can imagine they're pretty special, part of our history. Any guess on how many still exist today of those 500? Anybody? 10, maybe? Anybody? 200? 100? 50? Good guesses? The answer is 5. The 5th copy surfaced in 2017 and was sold at auction. So you might want to silently think of the cost paid at the auction in your head. Perhaps some of you may even know the story of the 5th copy and how it involves this city of Mount Vernon. Wait till you hear this. At first, this is cool. This is really cool. But first, the other 4. One is carefully protected in our own Westchester County Archives. Thank you, Westchester County Historical Society. Barbara Davis, thank you. In Elmsford. And another is in the New York Public Library. 2 copies, unfortunately, got away from New York. One's in California, one's in Ohio. Okay. But that 5th copy, here's the part, the Mount Vernon part. It was put up for sale by an anonymous descendant of Colonel David Mulford. He was a patriot who served in the Revolutionary War, and he lived out in Southampton, Long Island. He was delivered a copy of this. Now you gotta remember, horsebacks, travel was slow. There was a patriot named Uriah Rogers who was serving as a major in Mulford's regiment. And that Uriah Rogers rode out by horseback across Long Island and delivered that copy to him out there. Now, why do we know this? You never know when you scribble on something what is going to happen, but on the back of this one, Rogers had written a little note saying that he admitted to boldly having read it already before he delivered it. So, now, some of you know where 2nd Avenue is in Mount Vernon. I'm sure you do. I'm sure you do. I lived in New Rochelle for a couple of years, but, well, if you had been reading the Argus, the Mount Vernon Argus, right? This is, I will be talking about the Argus. But on July 13th, get the year, 1895. Okay, I know none of you were alive in 1895, not 1995, 1895. That was the local newspaper. You would have learned something. Robert L. Mulford, he was the great-grandson of Colonel Mulford. He was putting on public display that copy of the 1776 Declaration in his home on 2nd Avenue, open to the public. Somebody's got to dig into this story. Yeah, I don't know. Assign this to somebody out there. So I mean, I was digging into this information. I couldn't help but share it with all of you. So what was shared at the auction, that the document had been lovingly kept in a bureau drawer, rarely touched or exposed to the light. So now, after another 100 years, so the copy at the auction sold for $1.8 million. And the owner recently loaned it to the Museum of the American Revolution, and it was seen again after being seen in Mount Vernon to the public. So why am I telling you this? Okay. Well, first I say, check all that old stuff you have in your attic before you throw it out, just take a little look, is it a Revolutionary War document? But also think about this, it's a little more serious. There are various avenues or pathways that I think all of you, certainly I, take to find a connection to our history. You spoke about connecting to our history. You understand this, all of you understand this. And obviously we don't all have 1.8 million, certainly I don't, to own a copy of that era of history. But we sure do have the chance, I'm going to say the obligation, if I may, the obligation to become aware of our history by whatever approach, different for everybody, kids, adults, different, whatever approach works for you. For many, I think place makes a difference. I mean, think about this place. Just look behind you. And think about objects. Now, you probably know a bit about the story of the bell that you're going to hear here. I mean, just imagine that bell hidden during the Revolutionary period so that you can imagine it wouldn't be melted down for ammunition. But also imagine this actual church. Think of the walls, only 2/3 built. It wasn't finished. And imagine the bloody and dying soldiers, some patriots, some Hessians, you know, you go back to that great, some British. Those folks were being brought here because it became a hospital. Doesn't place matter? Doesn't preserving places matter? I really think it does. I mean, thank goodness you're also interested in this. So imagine also, you could go up to Hartsdale now. You can drive by, but they're fundraising so that the home where Washington and the French General Rochambeau, you know, the French were our steadfast allies. That house is being restored. And imagine standing there and listening to them talking, those two generals. I can't imagine it. But you know, I'm a big fan, a very big fan of libraries, historical societies, absolutely. I think there are a lot of excellent resources that are in video form, short and long. Popular culture, I mean, popular culture, I don't know, you all have your favorites. Maybe Turn was a favorite, or maybe, you know, you all have your favorites. I'd say, yeah, get hooked. But I'd also say, hey, how about dissect fact and fiction? It's always an interesting discussion to have around the dinner table. You know, well, was that, you know, really happen? We know how to help our kids figure out fact and fiction. So we surely do need to keep this history alive. Keep it alive, not just for the generation of the youngest person here, who might be that young man right there. Ah, yes, over there. But for all those upcoming generations. And I know because you guys are here today, I think I can depend on all of you and all of you here to help do that. I hope, you know, modestly that the work that Revolutionary Westchester 250 is doing, we are actually making some little videos. We've made 5, we're gonna make 3 more. And I'm gonna be back here in October, right, David? And October 16th, we think, with a really great program under David's leadership and my partnership. So I'm trying to get the words out. So my very end here, I think I've gone over my 10 minutes. I'd like to say something that I remember from 1963. Actually, I was in high school in 1963. This is an excerpt from Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech. It's a little emotional. He brought the words of the Declaration of Independence to us, to all of us, in a way that I then, and still now, found so compelling. And you know the story. Dr. King drew directly on the promises made. The promises made, it's up to us, you know, promises made in the Declaration and the Constitution to call for civil rights and an end to racism. And you know this quote, I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Thank you.